What's up YouTube, this is the Federation here, and this is not going to be a battle video, this is going to be a guide on army compositions. I just got a comment on my last video requesting that I do something along these lines, and since I try to make my channel about not only just the battles and me commentating, but also about helping those who watch my videos to maybe improve or pick up a few tips here and there, so I thought that comment was a good suggestion. And again, I'm not saying I am the greatest Total War player at all by any means, or I'm not saying I'm the best at making army compositions. This is just what's worked for me, what's gotten me through my quick battles successfully, what's helped me in tournaments. There are certainly lots of better Total War players than me, and people who certainly make better armies and micro better and all of that, but this is just my 2 cents and what's brought me success. So first, I'm just going to start with kind of the general concepts behind army composition. I like to pick a faction and then just build the army no matter what. So I don't like to switch my faction once my opponent chooses, or if the map changes or anything like that, except in like extreme circumstances. Like if I'm nomads and then they clearly are the type of person that's going to pike bot, something like that. Like, yeah, there's very rare occasions where I will change faction, but in general, I like to pick a faction and then deal with it. So the first thing you're going to have to be aware of is who are you playing against, and I'd say that's the most important thing to take into consideration. If I were playing a faction without elephants, I might, for example, not bother with the skirmishers unless I think they're likely to go pike heavy. So if I'm playing Rome, I'm not going to need skirmishers really at all. I mean, Rome does have auxiliary African elephants, and maybe you could take 1 or 2 for that, but say you're playing another barbarian, yeah, you definitely wouldn't need skirmishers then. If you're playing the Odrysian Kingdom, you're probably gonna want to take maybe another naked warrior, and then some kind of unit to hold them off, although I guess the Arverni don't really have a unit that can hold off a Thracian noble. Maybe you'd want to take a bunch of Celtic warriors just to absorb the charge, and then more noble horse because of that bonus versus infantry to kind of finish off the Thracian warriors, or maybe Oathsworn. So definitely take into consideration who you're playing against as your first priority all the time. Second, you want to consider the map. So for example, if you're playing on Nimauda-Sena, or a wide open map like this, maybe you want to take more skirmish units because they're going to be pretty effective in the open. You're not shooting through woods, there's nowhere for the enemy to hide, so particularly horse archers are very deadly on these wide open maps. If you're a faction like Parthia, Pontus, Bactria, anything like that, you can really pick at your opponent's flanks and there's nothing they can do about it because the woods can't slow your horse archers down, and your opponent can't hide in the woods. So for only 360 for the Mercenary Sarmatian Horse Archer, you can really rack up quite a bit of damage. So now I'm just going to go through a couple of builds kind of on the fly so you can be with me through my thinking process of how I would normally select a build. So if I were on Nimauda-Sena with the Arverni, and let's say I'm going up against Pontus, I would want to take, always as the barbarians, I take a core of elite infantry, because barbarian elite infantry, in my experience, is always much more cost effective than their second tier. This is different for the Lusitani, who have the veteran shield warriors, since they just had their price reduced to 700. But then again, the Lusitani nobles are still probably a more cost effective unit actually. I guess for the Iceni, their second tier has Headhunt available, so that could potentially be worth it over their heroic nobles, but certainly for the Arverni, I've always found that the most success is with these Oathsworn, and that's partly due to myself and Armenian King did some tests and found that Oathsworn, before the release of Thracian nobles, were the most powerful infantry in the game, and this means that they will even beat Praetorian Guard pretty handily, surviving with about 80 men left, or somewhere between 60 and 80 men if no abilities are used, after wiping out the Praetorian Guard unit. So they are incredibly deadly, and have the encourage effect, so definitely bring a core of them. Next, on this wide open map, you're definitely going to need some cavalry. Heavy horse are a fantastic unit for the price. Let's just take a look at their stats. They have this, oh, didn't mean to add a unit there. They have solid melee attack. You've got your typical bonus versus infantry, pretty decent charge bonus for a melee cavalry unit. And then they can go into wedge and frenzied charge, as all barbarian cav can. So that gives them a lot of killing power, and they'll do pretty well against most other melee cav, except obviously your elite tier melee cav. There's a really dependable mid-tier horse unit. Some people might like to take the light horse. Probably would recommend taking at least one unit. I don't always, just because they're so weak to missile fire, but you could certainly find a place for them if that is the type of game you like to play. And I usually do bring a light horse with a lot of builds, but the Arverni ones I'm not the biggest fan of. Also, or at least I would want to take a noble horse just for this expert charge defense, and then the encourage ability, just because I know Pontus has some very good shock cavalry, the Pontic Royal Cav, and the Pontic Royal Cav would almost certainly wipe out the heavy horse without too many losses, but against a noble horse, it's just not going to stand a chance. With expert charge defense, which by the way means that the melee attack and damage are increased against charging enemies, the shock cavalry won't stand too much of a chance, and so this way you have at least one unit that you know will be dependable in the cav fight. Then I'm going to take these Levy Freemen, because as I stated in one of my earlier videos, these are one of the most cost-effective units in the game. With this 25 bonus versus large and cavalry counter tactics, I think triples, maybe quadruples bonus versus large, you're just going to tear through any unit of cavalry if you can get them into the fight. And I mean any unit. These guys in Cataphracts, if you get this bonus versus large bumped up to 75 or 100, they're going to kill it easily. And if you look at something like a Chosen Spearman, its bonus versus large is only 15. So if you use cavalry counter tactics, the bonus versus large only goes up to 45 or 60. So it's not going to have that much more killing power than a Levy Freeman. The main advantage of a Chosen Spearman and a Spear Noble is that when cavalry counter tactics aren't being used, they're much more effective. They also have a little bit more staying power, or a lot more staying power. But these Levy Freemen, as far as a one cav fight wonder goes, are pretty unmatched. You're also going to want to take probably a Naked Warrior if your opponent has any infantry whatsoever, just because of this 20 bonus versus infantry and a pretty significant charge bonus. These guys in the flank of a fight are going to be absolutely deadly. So the strategy is kind of to hold your enemy in a lot of places, basically have every unit engaged, and then have this guy hanging out at the back. And once the lines are all engaged, you quickly can move in since he's not armored. He's only got 10 armor, so he has a lot of stamina and a lot of pace, and you can get him into a flank and do a lot of damage. It's almost always useful to carry one, unless you're going against a cav faction. Then these skirmishers are just because Pontus can have pikes, and if your opponent makes a pike box, you won't have enough to punch a gap that your Oathsworn can quickly fill. So that's kind of my background for a barbarian build. If I were somebody like Parthia, what I've found to be most effective with Parthia is a lot different from what I would feel not guilty bringing. So this is about what I've found most effective with Parthia. So it's going to be a lot of these guys, a couple of melee cav, a few horse archers, and then the rest are slingers. So let's take out that Midian cav, make it a noble blood, and you get the idea. Let's get rid of that last guy and bring a Peltis. So this is what I find by far to be the most effective for Parthia. You have a Royal Cataphract General, probably one of the hardest units in the game to kill, if not the hardest. 2 Camel Cataphracts to guarantee you dominate the cav fight, even if it happens on 2 flanks. People very rarely split their cav force into more than 2 flanks. 3 Eastern Cataphracts, which will certainly kill almost any cavalry in the game. The only cavalry they won't kill are other cataphracts or very elite melee cavalry such as Noble Horse, Azet Knights, things like that. And they only cost 1060, and will still, they'll kill a Bactrian Noble Horse with about 40 to 50 men left. And then 2 Median Cav, who are somewhat quick but also somewhat heavy melee cav. And then a Noble Blood Cav, who is a very deadly melee cav. Kind of like a heavy horse, but a little bit better in some respects. Then you have these 2 horse archers, who are very good at dealing with elephants, also good at dealing with pikes, and for any army they're very good at just distracting. It doesn't matter who you're coming up against, always take at least 1 or 2 horse archers, because they can just keep your enemy annoyed, disrupt their attempts at moving forward. There's always a use for at least 1 or 2 units of them. And then this core of slingers, you might be thinking, well, that's pretty unprotected if you don't have infantry. You can use these cavalry as a support for them, and I think I've done that in a couple of my videos, where you just use your cavalry as kind of a static line right behind your slingers, and the moment they charge you, you charge out and meet them with your cataphracts, and that will kill most any cav and keep your skirmishers very protected. Without wasting the money on infantry, you're guaranteed to dominate the cav fight, and once that happens, you're free to just pick away at them with your skirmishers. It's very hard to counter. I personally am not too sure how I would counter it. Probably just hope you win the skirmish fight and bring a lot of spears, but then again, Parthia could also bring a Parthian sword-based army, or something that's not exactly this, and so it's very difficult for your opponent to counter this unless they guessed correctly what you're bringing, and even then, it's a bit of a challenge. So, let's say we're building with somebody like, let's go with a pike faction. Let's go with Egypt. Now, Egypt is great since they have a lot of options to them, and this is just one way I would build, and I'm making this build very quickly. But let's say I want to go for a fear army. So I have the elephants, which create fear. I want to take a couple of shock cavalry just because their quick kills can actually give a morale crush that's similar to the fear effect. When a unit loses like 20-30 men over a period of several seconds, that does hurt morale significantly more than losing 20 or 30 men over, say, half a minute or a minute. So these guys can contribute to the fear factor. You're going to want to take probably a camel spearman, maybe 2, because of their scare effect, and they also have a trample ability, which is very unique for a melee cav. I think they're the only melee cav in the game that has it. You'll also want maybe a citizen cav and, say, a light cav, just because that way you can chase down their skirmishers and prevent them from hitting your elephants. Then take a camel archer, just because camel archers also have this scare horses effect, in addition to whistling shot and flaming shot. And then let's go with some javelins, maybe 5. Actually, we don't even need light peltists. We can go with Egyptian javelin men, since they are about 3/4 the price, and they're going to do pretty much the same killing. Then we'll get a Soviet cultist, which also has the scare effect. And at this point, we can just get a line of, let's go with a few Galatian swords, and a Nubian spear, a thorax sword, and 1 more Galatian sword. And so you might look at an army like this and be like, wow, that infantry is really weak. But the point of this army isn't the infantry. The point is to make use of the fact that all of these units in some way are going to cause the enemy to rout when it probably shouldn't. So these javelins can get a lot of quick kills, which, as I mentioned, can hurt morale pretty significantly. Elephants are going to have the scare effect, also the quick kills. Then if you use their stampede charge, that's an instant rout if you can get them blobbed up. So the strategy with an army like this would be to engage your Galatian swords, which aren't going to last too long and so only give you a short time. But then you have your Soviet cultists right in behind, which not only are going to be scaring the enemy units, but also encourage your own Galatian swords. So that's going to give you a bit more time to work. You can have a thorax sword unit in, say, the middle of your Galatian sword line, and leave it on formation attack just to give you a little bit of stability. Have your javelins right in behind to start raining fire down, and then as the enemy engages your infantry, You can take on their cav with these Ptolemaic cav, and throw in a camel spearman on one flank and a camel archer on the other, to hopefully rout their cav quickly, and while the cav engagement's going on, you can sneak a light cav by, take out their skirmishers, and then let your elephants have fun. Obviously this won't work every time, but it's just an idea, and it's worked for me quite a few times, just because the enemy's army will rout after having lost a quarter or even half their men, and it can be a lot of fun. It doesn't really give the opponent much of a chance if it's done correctly, and if you want, you can, for example, put your camel archers on whistling shot, and a javelin on flaming shot, and that will kill morale even more. So that's just a kind of general guideline for builds I would use. If you want to see other builds I've used, just go through my videos and pause after like 30 seconds and look at the units I've brought. I hope this gives you kind of an idea as to my thinking process when I go through a build, kind of things I look for, the priorities. The one thing you want to make sure is that my basic priority is to win 2 of the fights. So if you have the advantage in infantry and cavalry, you can do well. If you have the advantage in infantry and skirmishers, you can do well. Or what I find most effective is get the advantage in skirmishers and cavalry. Because if you can dominate 2 of those, and since Rome Total War basically works on a rock, paper, scissors system, you can wipe out the enemy's advantage in the 3rd category, and then go apart, just picking apart their army from there. Also, if you have the infantry and cav advantage, that gives you a great way to rush in and just wipe out the enemy before their skirmishers can do anything. And so the key to that is just making sure that you don't invest too heavily in the 3rd type that you think you won't need. And the types that you think you'll need will depend on who you're playing against and the map you're playing on, and that's a judgment call for you to make at the time of the battle. But anyways, I hope you guys have gained a little bit from this video, even hopefully some of the more experienced players. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I will see you all next time.